All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Cinnamon Moffat. I'm the Associate Director of Marine Research Support here at Hatfield, located in Newport, Oregon. If you're in the room, that sounds funny, but this is a hybrid event, so we have folks online and folks in the room. So welcome to you both. For folks online, if you have any questions for today's speaker, or if you have any technical issues seeing some of the content we've got or hearing our presenter, make sure to put your questions into the chat box. We have a volunteer in the room, Roseanne, who will help us navigate those and also read out your questions to today's speaker so that you can engage in our seminar today. For folks in the room, if you haven't been to one of these before, because it's a hybrid event, if you have any questions, I ask that you raise your hand and I'll bring you this mic. And that way folks online can hear the questions as well. And that way we all can work together to be able to participate and enjoy today's seminar. But once again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate everybody, however you are joining our seminar today. Wanted to do just a quick announcement and then I'll introduce today's speaker. So our next seminar is on November 6th. When Anna, who is a associate professor of marine studies with the College of Liberal Arts at Oregon State University, is going to be talking about devilfish, friendly whale, question mark, human interactions with gray whales from the past to the present. So that's going to be a really interesting talk. I hope you come and join us for that. If you're curious about any of our events, you can go to our homepage, check out the events page, and everything you'll need to join us either in person or online is on that page. If you're on any of our listservs, and you've been getting announcements from us, we are having some glitches with that. So if you are not getting the emails that you expect, feel free to email the me or anybody else on our team, and we can try to figure out how to get that fixed for you. But worst case scenario, go onto the website, check it out, and you can see what our events are. But I know that we have a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to just jump us right into it and introduce Danny Pimentel, who is an associate professor with immersive media and director of Oregon's Reality Lab at the University of Oregon. His research primarily focuses on cross-reality of media platforms, virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. Specifically, he conducts experimental research on examining how cross-reality storytelling experiences can contribute to the attitude and behavior changes across various contexts, including climate change, wildlife conservation, and mental and physical well-being. So we are excited to have Danny here, and I'm just going to hand it off. And if you want to go green, I'm going to turn the mic to you.
How are we sounding? This good? Hey, everybody. Great to hear you or see you and hear you and everyone here. Danny Pimentel, really honored. Again, thank you to Hatfield for making this event possible. And like Cinnamon said, I'm an assistant professor of immersive media psychology, director of the Oregon Reality Lab at the University of Oregon. When I tell people that, oftentimes people look at me a bit confused. They're like, I don't really understand what immersive media is. Certainly don't really get what media psychology is. So I'll explain about what I do as a researcher and as a designer and creative, but I want to shout out my team at the Oregon Reality Lab. We're a diverse group of people dedicated to the science of storytelling. I'm also a fellow at the Yale program on climate change communication and was recently a well-being by design fellow at Sesame Workshop, looking at how we tell stories for youth related to the environment and nature. So excited to share a little bit about my work. But back to that question, what do I do? Pull out your phone if you can. Those of you in Zoom land, you can pull out your phone to scan that QR code. It's going to ask you a question. Like you do with most things, don't read the terms of service. Just agree, just agree. It's fine. I'm not taking your data. But when people ask me what I do, this is probably the lowest hanging fruit, a very simple example of some of the experiences that I make, that my lab make. If you scan that, agree to the permissions, all you're going to do is use your rear-facing camera on your phone, hold your hand in front of that camera, and you should see something interesting appear on your hand. Spoiler alert, it is a sea turtle, right? Sea turtle hatchling. So when people ask me, what do we do in the lab? We create experiences like this and study how those experiences can change your perception, feelings towards, and understanding of not only the species at hand, but issues affecting that species. Another way to put what I do into context is I put screens in people's faces, generally, right? I like to put people in headsets and study how those experiences changes the way they behave, think, and feel. So any commercially available headset, I probably have made something for, have probably told a story through those headsets. But more formally, my discipline is really under this umbrella term of media psychology or media effects. It comes with this understanding that we are all storytellers. Everyone in this room, you're a storyteller, right? The science that you do, the data you collect, synthesize, analyze, and report is a story. And you're telling that story, hopefully, to have an impact on society or on an individual. That impact can be knowledge, it can be awareness, it can be emotional impact, influencing decision making. You tell stories because you want to change an outcome, right? And that is at the core of what we do as media psychologists, except we isolate three tools in our toolbox as storytellers. One, minds, the audiences we tell stories to. What's unique about them? What are the psychological factors unique to that particular community? Geographic, cultural, racial, gender identity. All those things influence how people process a story. Then you have messaging, right? That story, how are we packaging it? How are we framing it? Are we emphasizing a fact-based approach versus an emotional appeal, right? All that influences these outcomes. And modality, that's why I have it highlighted in yellow. That's a lot of what I focus on is that story to that community. What vehicle is carrying that story and what is unique about that vehicle that changes its impact on attitudes, how people feel, cognitions, how people think, and behaviors, what people do, which is ultimately the holy grail of our field. Now, second question I usually get is, okay, well, you're interested in causes and effects of media. What outcomes do you care about? I grew up in South Florida, and so I care deeply about the ocean. Spent a lot of my time on beaches, sea turtle nesting sites everywhere. I have a deep connection with the ocean because I grew up on the water. And so a lot of the work that I do is trying to tell stories about the ocean, right, since I was young. And we all know, everyone in this room, I'm preaching to the choir, right? Ocean health, we know, is critical to every facet of human society, right? Economically, health-wise, right? We get our food from the ocean. We work on the ocean, right? It has cultural, societal meaning to us, right? It connects us to a deeper it's another environment that we connect deeply to in various ways. Yet, despite its importance, we also can acknowledge that human activities has continuously led to its degradation, right? And that can happen for a variety of reasons, but one of the factors that I'm interested in as a storyteller is related to ocean literacy. This idea that humans can have a deep understanding of their effects on the ocean and how the ocean affects them. This reciprocal dynamic is ultimately what represents ocean literacy, right? So you have 7 ocean literacy principles, which you see up there, that have been studied, and there's a lot of research showing how ocean literacy or an ocean literate public is so important to not only increasing representation in marine science careers, but also to the protection and conservation of the ocean and marine species and marine life, right? Ocean literacy is incredibly important. But why do we have this disconnect among young people? This research, which I believe is now a year or so old, is sort of getting at young people having that disconnect, not having a high level of ocean literacy. And so one of the quotes from that research article is seen here, is explaining that much of this gap is because of a lack of direct experience, right? Everyone in this room has the luxury privilege of being in general close proximity to the ocean. Many Americans do not have that, right? And even those that do, there could be socioeconomic barriers that prevents them from regularly entering the ocean or having any kind of meaningful engagement with the ocean, as well as traumatic experiences at childhood. These are all things that can prevent you from forming a direct bond with the ocean. So what can we do as storytellers, right? As you can guess from the title of my talk, I'm here to make a case for why these devices here can ultimately serve as a way, as a catalyst to inspire people to seek out the ocean and engage with it in a meaningful way. But the elephant in the room, and I get this all the time, rightfully so, it's like, isn't this a dystopian look at how people engage with the ocean, right? This is a room, this is in the Smithsonian's Futures exhibit, I believe, 3 years ago. Everyone in headset right there is going on a virtual dive in a coral reef, experiencing it together. Some part of me is really excited about that, but some part of me is also viewing it as a dystopian reality. But my goal at the end of this talk is to change your view of this image and images like it to one of optimism, to one where if we thoughtfully design and integrate these kinds of technologies into how we engage and tell the story of the ocean, it can have a positive effect on ocean literacy and create deeper connections between audiences and the ocean. So the other thing I want to acknowledge is this isn't the first time we've had kind of that gut feeling of apprehension with technology, right? Every time there's an advancement technologically, there is some sort of moral panic, right? From print to the radio to the television. We're feeling it now with AI, right? I'm sure many of us are having some of this as well. But it's not the first time. And every time there's been a development, there's been a moral panic, and also examples of how those platforms can be used for good to connect audiences to the natural world in a meaningful way, right? Even with print, there was a lot of concern over deforestation, ink production, coal usage to get, scaled production of print magazines out to the world, a lot of concerns. But let's look at some examples of, how have, previous, devices and technological advancements contributed to building human nature gaps. With a clear terrestrial bias, I'll start on land because that's where we are, right? We look back to the printing press, hundreds of years ago, and then in the 1890s, when it's been able to scale, you had folks like George Brennell, who started Forest and Stream, which was a magazine at the time, all about, big game, wildlife conservation, and telling the story about the natural world in the United States. Now, George, as an editor and a scientist and a naturalist, he reviewed a lot of books about the subject matter, and he ended up reviewing that book that you see there, Hunting Trips of a Ranchman by Theodore Roosevelt, which was kind of his meanderings about life on land and being one with nature. But that review wasn't that good. It was a very scathing review. Mr. Roosevelt didn't take it lightly and approached George saying, what's going on, man? You burned my book. I don't like this. What's going on? And what started as an antagonistic interaction actually ended up flourishing into a really nice relationship over shared concern and dedication to the protection of the natural world. So they both ended up collaborating, forming the Boone and Crockett Club, which ended up doing a lot in terms of passing legislation to protect natural spaces in the United States. And their shared love really started over Yellowstone, which 15 years prior to that encounter, more or less, Yellowstone received designation as a national park, right? So that was really important, but it had no teeth, right? It wasn't really protecting anything because it wasn't enforcing any of the behavior you'd hope to have when respecting the land. And so they tried using print to tell the story of this issue, right? Of poaching, right? But it didn't move the needle. And Congress was kind of skeptical over, well, do we need to really, invest in additional legislation to protect the land? So what did George do? He said, let's add some visuals. Let's tell the visual story of the actual atrocities happening in Yellowstone. He published these images in 1894 with the title, The Butcher's Work, showing what the poachers at the time were doing to the bison in Yellowstone. And as you can see there, and this is quoted directly from the National Park Service, this flagrant case of bison killing would convince a still skeptical Congress that legislation was necessary to protect game in the national parks. So it moved the needle, right? And it gave the legislation teeth. And so they passed the Yellowstone Protection Act in 1894. Here you see some cavalry folks with some of the score by one of the famous poachers at the time. And so it really helped protect the national parks. And we see the same with other forms of media, right? Radio, BBC published the world's first natural broadcast with a musician and the nightingale birds, performing with the birds singing behind. It inspired a huge appreciation for nature. Hundreds of thousands of people tuned into that broadcast, and many reported that as a catalyst for them going out into nature and reconnecting with nature. We also see this in the same time period, 1920s, with the stereoscope, the predecessor to these guys. I don't know if you remember the Viewmaster, right? We've all had these as kids. Before that, you had the stereoscopes, which essentially created offsetting images to give the illusion of depth and transporting you to these beautiful natural landscapes. And so people would take photos of the national parks and share it among the folks at the Stereoscopic Club, inspiring, again, appreciation with nature. And everyone in this room and online definitely knows this guy, right? Jacques Cousteau, 1940s, right? Pioneered the aqualung, which allowed him to go underwater, audio, visual, transport people to the depths of the sea from the comfort of their own home. And as you can see there from the Ocean Conservancy, we all owe a debt to Cousteau. He inspired generations of marine biologists, teachers, explorers, divers, and others who turned to the sea for a career. These are all examples of technological advancements visual, audio, narrative storytelling that move the needle in meaningful ways, right? And so as we think of what this represents the concept of technological nature, right? This idea that we can experience the natural world through media, and that experience can actually have a measurable and profound impact on audiences, right? When we view nature in this way, it can shift our place in the world. And I think that's very profound. So what's different in today's, media landscape, right? Really, it's just old wine, new bottles. The same premises hold. Media can affect us, but there's something to these new platforms, right? When I talk about new platforms, I'm talking about, like Cinnamon mentioned at the beginning, XR, which can stand for extended reality. It's kind of a way to think about it. And it's a spectrum, right? From the mobile experience you tried on your phone, that would be considered augmented reality, right? Using your camera to place digital content onto the physical world. Then you have mixed reality, like these smart glasses here, which essentially take digital content and meaningfully embed it, right? So in MR, that sea turtle understands where the floor is, can walk around, and have an interaction with the physical environment, much like you can in the physical world. And then you have virtual reality, which is your VR headsets, you're immersed completely in a computer-generated virtual environment. These devices and this kind of spectrum of XR does something to us, does many things, has several illusions that make it fundamentally different than traditional media, right? So what are those things? One is a sense of presence, right? When you put on these glasses, you put on a virtual reality headset, you look at that sea turtle through your phone, even if you don't think it, you're feeling what's called a sense of presence, of being there with this other thing that your brain might be telling you is not real, but you feel a sense of social presence. If you're in VR, you can feel like you're in a completely different environment altogether, a sense of spatial presence. So that's something important. Then you have plausible interaction, this idea that with these devices, you can interact with nature in plausible, natural ways, right? Things just interact with the physical space like if it were an actual physical thing. And then self-modification, this idea that with these technologies, we can not only change our environment, but we can change ourselves. We can embody a tree, we can embody a sea turtle, right? We can embody a cat if we really want to, right? So why does this matter for storytelling as we kind of sit back and soak that in? This is one of my favorite studies from a research lab in Stanford, which pretty much had people put on smart glasses much like these. When you put them on, you saw another gentleman sitting across from you in an empty chair. And then when the researchers asked you to take the headset off and you finished that task and to sit in one of those chairs, where do you think people sat? People sat on the side where the virtual human wasn't sitting, right? What does that tell us? That subconsciously, we're treating virtual synthetic things that we know aren't real, and we're assigning them some semblance of reality, right? We are treating them as if they are physically there, if they're real, right? Additionally, the experiences we go through, studies have shown, when you go through something in augmented or virtual reality, it's stored in what's called autobiographical memory, right? That's where you store your lived experiences. So these are not moving images on a screen, these are experiences, right? And that matters and ties into this larger framework called the media equation paradigm, which argues that humans treat the synthetic like we do the organic. We treat computers as social actors sometimes too. Really fascinating work, but is at the core of my argument today, which is when we experience nature through these devices, our brain files that under a lived experience, and we can use that strategically in meaningful ways. So one example of a study that we did was back at the University of Florida with my advisor, Dr. Sri Kalyanaraman, who coined this term virtual verdancy. He had this idea of, well, if research shows that exposure to nature, going out for a nature walk, can benefit your creativity, your well-being, then it should also hold true that if you go through that in VR, it will benefit you as well. So we randomly assigned participants to either walk through a physical nature trail, walk through a 360 recorded video of that nature trail, and walk through a computer-generated recreation of that nature trail. We measured how that walk affected them emotionally, psychologically, and creatively. And ultimately what we found is one of the few times null results can actually be a good thing in our field, right? It's like, oh yeah, you found no differences. No differences in affect and emotions, and no differences in creativity, right? So essentially the benefits of exposure to nature were uniform or non-different across those three conditions, right? This gets at this other notion of embodied cognition, this idea that if our perception of reality is rooted in the interaction between our physical body and the physical world, the same holds true for the virtual body and our virtual worlds that we're engaging with. It shapes our perception. So with all that being said, can Ocean XR, that term I'm using, Ocean XR, essentially represents the use of these technologies to simulate ocean experiences. Can Ocean XR bridge that experience gap? Can it build connectedness to the ocean, build elements of ocean literacy? Is it feasible? So to do that, I essentially propose what I'm calling kind of a screen to sea pipeline. This idea that if we think of traditional media all the way through actual direct experience in the ocean, where does XR fit in? Can those simulated interactions actually get people more interested in direct experiencing of the ocean, whether it's through research excursions, visiting the ocean in some way, but taking them across that spectrum of sensory experience? Where does XR fit in? So the first step in realizing, or at least exploring the premise of a screen to sea pipeline, is to understand the state of Ocean XR, right? These devices have been around for over a decade. I've been studying this for over a decade. Are there experiences that relate to the ocean? And if so, how are they embedding ocean literacy, right? Do we have anything to work with, or do we need to start from scratch? So this research was funded with Unity, which is a popular game engine, the Tides Foundation, and the Hydrus, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to building ocean empathy and connections with the ocean. My colleagues, Dr. Erica Woolsey and Dr. Geraldine Faville, were part of this project as well. And ultimately, our goal was to understand what's the state of Ocean XR. We identified over 100 XR experiences, augmented virtual reality applications that had to do with the ocean. After additional exclusion criteria, it resulted in 94 total Ocean XR experiences published and available between 2015 and 2024 roughly. Here's some example of some of the content we found, right? AR Reef, Deep Blue, which is a really cool VR experience where you come face to face with a whale like that. And we analyzed those things. And ultimately what we found was that generally virtual reality was king, right? Most of the Ocean XR experience were built for virtual reality headsets, which are incredibly expensive, especially at the time, compared to your phones, which everyone has. Second, augmented reality on the rise. So AR is definitely on the rise. The question then became, well, who's making this content? Okay? And we found that overwhelming majority of the creators of Ocean XR content come from companies, right? Corporations whose underlying motivation is to make money, right? As you can see on the far right, NGOs and governments not responsible for the majority of Ocean XR content, right? So that's very telling, and I'll leave the interpretation up to you. But more importantly, of those experiences, we found very few actually contained multiple ocean literacy principles embedded in those experiences, right? So here you can see from 1 to 7, most of the ocean literacy principles that any of the Ocean XR content touched on had to do with number 5 and number 6, right? So the ocean supports a great diversity of life, and the ocean and humans are inextricably connected. Those were the most popular, but a lot of room left to work with. And so that's our key takeaway. Ocean XR is limited in breadth and depth. So we have a lot of work to do. Step 2 in the screen to sea pipeline is, well, what are the views of Ocean XR? We understand that some stuff exists, and it's not very good at building ocean literacy or addressing it. But how do people feel about Ocean XR? You have your own feelings, but how do other communities feel about Ocean XR in this capacity? So in this series of projects, we worked with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, National Geographic, and the Hydrus again. And we spent several days in the British Virgin Islands, although it was a longer period of time working with folks from the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States to understand how do coastal communities feel about XR, and virtual reality specifically, as a way to teach and engage audiences about the ocean. This includes also government officials and any policymakers, right? Where does Ocean XR fit in? And so
Eastern Caribbean, our beautiful beaches, rivers, and ocean.
I'll pause that for a second. We worked with National Geographic OECS. They created this experience called Ridge to Reef, which is a VR experience that takes you from the top of a ridge down into the ocean. The purpose is to show audiences, policymakers, kids, educators. We had different narratives for different target audiences, how actions on land affect life beneath the sea, right? So we wanted to show that, and here's a quick video just to give you an idea of what that feels like.
Offer recreation and relaxation. This river flows from land to sea, bringing rainwater, nutrients, and sand to the ocean. Sadly, it also transports much of our waste produced on land. How will that affect this baby sea turtle, who is starting her journey from beach to open ocean? Dive in, and don't forget to breathe. Just like us, all of these.
So I'll stop it there for time, and I'm happy if I did have a VR headset, I'd totally let you go on the journey. It's 4 minutes long, and we had hundreds of dives over the course of 3 days in the British Virgin Islands. Again, we tested it with the intent of answering three questions, right? How do BV Islanders describe their relationship with the ocean? How do virtual dives fit in terms of educating them about marine topics? And can the virtual dive itself, like you saw there, actually build connectedness with the ocean among this community? So our first study, we interviewed over 40 folks, adults, using reflective thematic analysis. We sort of assessed based on their responses, what are some of the themes based on what they're saying. And as you can see in our results, again, very high level overview. Majority of our participants were government officials with significant influence over various policies affecting marine life and marine health, followed by education and educators, as well as administration and business folks. 3 key themes emerged. I'll only cover a few, just high level. One theme that kept emerging was their relationship with the ocean. People have a very complicated relationship with the ocean for a variety of reasons, and it kind of addresses this presumed proximity breeds affection or connection narrative that comes where people assume that just because you live close to the ocean that you must have a deep connection with it. That is certainly not the case, and there's several factors as to why that is. And then the third theme that I want to highlight is ocean literacy and VR, this idea that they were very receptive to the use of virtual reality to build ocean connectedness and ocean literacy. So very quickly, here are some of the excerpts from the barriers to access sub-theme, which pretty much gets at this idea that despite being super close to the water, most people didn't have any meaningful interaction with the ocean, right? They weren't diving regularly, they weren't swimming regularly, and a lot of that is due to childhood trauma, can be just also sociocultural factors that limit their ability to regularly engage with the ocean. So that was something of particular importance. And accessibility. When we talk about where VR fits in, almost all of our participants emphasize the promise of virtual reality as a way to bridge that experience gap, right? And many, after trying the virtual dive, did mention that it inspired them to actually go out and try to find ways to connect in a deeper, more meaningful way with the ocean and marine science broadly. And this is, again, across the board, whether it was government officials or just educators or anybody else. So the key takeaway here is that Ocean XR is viewed as a promising tool. So that's great, right? Next step. We know that Ocean XR is limited. We know that there's promise, but is it actually doing the thing we think it's doing, right? Can it actually change people's relationship with the ocean in a meaningful way? So also with some of our sample at the British Virgin Islands, we had 57 adult BV Islanders participate in a pre-post test where we had them go on a virtual dive and answer some questions. And one of the measures we were really interested in, psychologically, there's this term or this measure, this variable called inclusion of ocean in self scale, right? IOS. It essentially assesses, using a series of Venn diagrams you see on the bottom right, the degree to which you incorporate the ocean in your identity, in your self-perception, right? The greater the overlap, typically that correlates with other pro-environmental outcomes and attitudes, for example. So this is a really important measure, and also something that we can quickly assess when people don't have that much time and we're not able to, conduct a rigorous survey that takes 45 minutes to an hour, right? So what did we find? We also measured ocean empathy, which is a multi-item scale assessing emotional connections to the ocean. So we measured that as well. And we found that the virtual dive, just a 4-minute virtual dive, significantly increased not only IOS, how much they incorporate the ocean in their identity, but also significantly increased their empathic connections to the ocean broadly, right? And to various issues affecting the ocean. So again, this tells us that a short dive in VR can have at least a short-term positive effect. A lot of work still needs to be done on long-term effects. And so if you want to collaborate, please let me know. We also replicated these findings with teenagers in the BVI. So even among youth, we had 22 BVI youth go through the same procedure, and we found the same results. So most of this talk so far has been focusing on virtual reality. But like you all experienced at the beginning, it was really easy to pull out your phone and really easy to just immediately launch an AR experience. So what good is a VR experience if most people don't have a headset? How many people have a headset at home here? I think I saw 2 hands. And of the 2 hands, when's the last time you put it on? Weeks, months, maybe? Okay, virtual golf. Not an underwater activity, but yeah, it's a virtual golf. I get it. I get it. So the point is, right, most people in this room, probably online, don't have a headset. So how do we explore accessibility? How do we explore the possibility that a mobile-based Ocean XR experience can have similar positive impact as a more immersive VR base? That's what we wanted to explore too. So these series of studies, mostly collaboration with the Sea Turtle Conservancy and other sea turtle organizations, we're exploring that specific question. So essentially what we did is we spent a weekend at the Tortuga Music Festival, right? It's probably the only time in my career as a social scientist I got to collect data barefoot. I wish I could do that more often. Unfortunately, that's not the case, right? It'd be weird if I was barefoot in the lab, right? But the beach, it's okay. So we spent 3 days there testing various underwater experiences. The first we tested was a virtual reality experience called Project Shell. Let's see if the videos work. Not sure. I think it's frozen. Oh no, did we freeze? Oh, oh no. The PowerPoint froze. Wait, we're back. All right, wait. Let's see. Okay, well, I'll skip that. Anyway, so as you can see here, I'm going to skip the other slide just because it seems to be too much for the PowerPoint. But essentially, we created a VR experience where you embody a loggerhead sea turtle and experience various threats facing the species at key moments in its development, right? From hatchling to nesting adult. And one of the studies we conducted out before the music festival study was just to understand, is it possible to feel a sense of ownership over a sea turtle body, over marine life, given that, you know, like formologically, it's just a whole different body type. They're a non-bipedal creature. How do we create that illusion of embodiment? And so we ended up testing different versions. And essentially, the point of this slide is to show you that it doesn't really matter if you get haptic feedback. You can see the gentleman in the GIF there is wearing a haptic vest, a backpack that functioned as its shell. And we were sending vibrations down his spine to see if that added to the sense of ownership over the turtle body. And when we switched that off, there were no differences in the illusion of actually embodying the creature, right? So it's less about the haptics and more about the visual and the embodied element of actually doing these movements and seeing your physical movements reflected on a virtual character. That's what creates that illusion, which then creates connection to the species and then other pro-environmental outcomes, which we found. So the question then became, not everyone has a VR headset. So can AR do the same? So this is where we spent 3 days at the music festival. We tested the sea turtle experience on the right in VR, and then the 2 in the middle and left, that's our augmented reality version. So this is something you can play on your phone, propping it down and controlling the sea turtle with your body, or you can play on a laptop or a virtual mirror. And so we compared both of these to see if they're actually having a similar impact in terms of connectedness and what's called body transfer, sense of ownership over the body, which has connections to pro-environmental behaviors. And very quickly, just because I know we're short on time, most people, preferred AR over VR, right? So people had the option to choose mobile or virtual reality. VR was almost never selected. It was bulky, and people wanted something easy to use. So accessibility was key. And then second, people that used the AR had similar levels of ownership over the body of a sea turtle as people in the VR headset, right? So there's very limited differences despite the differences in immersion, right? So that's incredibly important. And the strength of connection to the body had a positive relationship with a lot of key outcomes that we care about. Intention to donate to sea turtle conservation, intention to volunteer, things like that. So very promising. Now, if we know that AR is just as impactful as VR in certain cases, then we should be investing more in AR because it's more accessible, right? It's a better entry point for people in this screen-to-sea pipeline. So this next sequence of studies focused on AR-based interactions with marine life, right? Beginning with the collaboration with Google and Snap, and then followed by a collaboration here at ODFW with some folks here. So I'll share the penguin experience. We created a game called Penguin Rescue, where you actually rehabilitated an oil slick penguin in your sink using your phone. And we studied how this very quick 2-minute experience affected people's connection to marine life and also their environmental concern and intention to donate. In just a few weeks, it garnered over 60,000 downloads organically. So the joke I always say is that my lab helped clean 60,000 penguins. And people always ask, like, I don't think there's 60,000 penguins in Oregon. I don't know, but I explain after that. But 60,000 downloads, and more important, if you look at the right-hand side, you'll see the demographics or the psychographics of people that gravitated towards this experience. Nowhere on that list is anything related to the environment, to the ocean, to animals. So games and AR, incredibly cool entry point for people as a way to get them in the tent. And once you have them in, tell them that story about marine life, tell them that story about the ocean. More importantly, just that short 2-minute exposure, we conducted a controlled lab experiment where we tested penguin rescue. We found that just that short exposure significantly increased what's called INS, or inclusion of nature in self, right? So broadly, did they feel more connected to wildlife? And they did. It significantly increased, as well as environmental concern for the issues affecting that species in question, right? So the last question I'll ask is, well, if virtual interactions with marine life can build that connectedness and concern, can it do the same for entire environments? And so I had the really amazing pleasure of working with folks at the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Dr. Sarah Klein, as well as Friends of Otter Rock, which I know are here as well, and many other scientists, related kind of in that periphery, to tell the story of the marine reserve, specifically one marine reserve in question, Otter Rock, right? How many of you have been to Otter Rock? I assume most of you, right? What's funny is I had a conversation yesterday with someone, and I asked them, I was like, have you been to Otter Rock before? And they were like, no, I've never been. I was like, oh, have you been to Devil's Punch Bowl? She's like, oh yeah, I go there all the time. I was like, okay, well, therein lies the problem, right? You can be directly facing the marine reserves and not know they're there, not know they exist, because there's no clear line of delineation. There's not like a big arrow pointing down saying, hey, marine reserve here, and it stops right here. So that was one of the key problems when myself and ODFW had conversations around where Ocean XR might fit into, their communications is, well, first, people don't know it's there. And if they do, they don't know where it ends. And even if you tell them, they still don't understand why the marine reserves exist, what they do, what function they have. So how do we tell that story in an engaging way? So we had these kind of targets in mind. We wanted to deepen connection with those ecosystems. We wanted to increase awareness, but also awareness of the boundaries, and understand where Ocean XR fits into connecting audiences, whether they're regular visitors, or maybe they're not even at Otter Rock, maybe in the comfort of their own home. Maybe they have the opportunity to connect deeply with Otter Rock and thus broader marine ecosystems as a whole. Those were some of our goals. And so to do that, myself and my amazing team of faculty, students, staff at the OR Lab, in collaboration with ODFW, Friends of Otter Rock, and many other partners, came up with 2 experiences that I have after the talk. If you want to try them out, totally happy to show you. One was a mobile experience, right? So people can, just like you did at the beginning, scan the QR code and see a virtual recreation of the Otter Rock Marine Reserve. You're able to visit. I know we also have these placards here as well. So if you're in here, scan it, you can definitely experience it. And we created an experience for the spectacles. Spectacles are the names of these smart glasses. They're developed by Snapchat. A lot of people don't know they're a hardware manufacturer. So a little bit about what we built before I talk about what happened and what we found. Again, it was an iterative process. Here's Dr. Sarah Klein at our lab, my student Isaac taking a picture. The first thing I'll notice, and Sarah, if you're out there on Zoom land, I'm sure you'll be okay with me saying this, but most people have this initial feeling towards this technology, which is, I don't know, I'm kind of apprehensive. It feels kind of dystopian. We want to connect people to nature. We don't want to put more screens in their faces. So we had to really make the case for why XR is the way to go. And once Sarah tried it out, you kind of see, a smile, right? You see this idea of like, oh, I get it now. We can simulate direct experiences, and we can actually give people something that they can't otherwise get unless they're on site, unless the tide is perfect and they're able to enter a tide pool, right? We can allow that to happen, right? So we got a lot of feedback from the team that informed the design. Here are just some of the feedback we got from NGOs, from ODFW, and from subject matter experts. Some of our asset creation, we used 3D models, AI, and other tools to create models of tide pools, for example, based on real-world tide pools. Use GIS data, like you see in the top left, to create a virtual recreation of the 1.2-mile stretch of Otter Rock. so that you can use it as a map and travel around it in AR, as well as using AI tools to create rocky reef structures like you see on the right and tide pool structures, as well as animals, right? We had to create a lot of the animations and 3D models of the creatures in collaboration with subject matter experts as well. Again, none of this is possible without interdisciplinary collaboration, right? So as we think about a screen to see pipeline and the feasibility of Ocean XR, it's not possible unless we partner together, right? So that's kind of the through line here. Some images of the software if you're curious of how it looks. And then the experience itself, if you do want to try it out, let's see if I go back. I think I might have skipped something. Hold on. Come on, PowerPoint. Let's try. Okay. Yes, so if you want, you can scan that, or if you want to scan the placard on your seat, you can try the mobile experience. I suggest maybe turning audio off if you're in here, just because if everyone's audio starts going off, then it's like a cacophony of voiceover narration. But this is the mobile experience that we created. Once you, again, provide permission to collect your data, it's not to collect your data, it's just to get access to your camera and to the movement of your device. You're able to essentially tour Otter Rock like you see in the video here. You can go into kelp beds, you can go into the tide pools and learn about various things about that. And if you go to each of the 3 locations, the rocky reef, the kelp bed, and the tide pool, you unlock a very, very special encounter with the gray whale, okay? Now, I won't spoil what happens after that, but feel free to do it. We don't have to do it now because that might take you a bit, especially to visit each of the environments. But just have it loaded up if you want to close your phone and then revisit Otter Rock afterwards. It'll be awesome. And then you can compare that experience with the spectacles experience. You see an early version of the smart glasses experience right here in this video. You can pop your head in and feel like you're actually in a tide pool, for example, and kneel down and pick things up. It's a very embodied natural experience. So I'm excited to let you try that out as well. All this, the mobile and the wearable experience, we tested multiple times. We've gone out to Otter Rock at least 3 or 4 times, lugging all this equipment out there, just putting screens on people's faces at the beach. And most times people have the same reaction. It's like, I'm at the beach to get away from my device, man. Why are you putting phones and screens in my faces? And then once they try it out, a light bulb turns on, right? So a lot of it is also just, how do we get people to become comfortable with the idea that maybe technology is not such a bad thing out in the wild, right? Especially in very measured doses. So we conducted a usability study almost a year ago. As you can see here, we had everyone from surfers to just visitors at Devil's Punch Bowl Overlook trying out both the smart glasses and a very basic version of the mobile version. And we found a lot of interesting things, a lot of suggestions in terms of what they wanted to see. Most people acknowledged and were excited about the opportunity to see what's beneath the surface, hence the name of the experience, right? Otter Rock beneath the surface. Because most people, even the surfer, they're not going down below. They're not staying below. They're up at the surface. And so there was a real intrigue around being able to, in a safe environment, learn about the magic that is protected by the marine reserves and learn why they're protected. We did a bunch of usability studies in Eugene as well. Here are some of my students conducting usability studies. But what's really interesting about some of the results is the whole purpose of this really started with an understanding of, can showing them Otter Rock actually get them to understand the boundaries? So when they visit there, they know where it ends and where it begins. And as you see here, we had people essentially at the, before in the pre-survey, before they would try the experience, they were outlining the, expected boundaries of Otter Rock. So they were asked, outline where you think Otter Rock is. And then we compared that after the fact and had them do the same thing. And as you see here, it went from a very tight kind of, range to a very wide range. So there was a lot of error, a lot of kind of overestimation of the sizing of Otter Rock after going through it in AR, right? So it kind of did the opposite of what we wanted, right? It got less accurate, which is not a bad thing if you think about it from the perspective of what's happening emotionally and psychologically when people experience something in AR, right? That could be awe, it can be perception of grandeur because you feel like you're actually in this massive environment. You're looking at this blue whale or this gray whale, you're looking at this rocky reef, this huge tide pool, right? That can prime kind of perceptions of grandeur that might spill over and lead to an overestimation of those boundaries, right? We still want to dig into this, but it doesn't mean we got to rule out AR altogether. Some other things, some quotes here from folks. We've tested this in climate change game night at the University of Oregon. And then more recently, in May, we spent Memorial Day weekend testing out more or less the final versions of the mobile and wearable experience with visitors. And I'll skip this really quickly just to show you one key finding, which I think is very important. There's a variable called place attachment. It is a measure of how connected audiences feel to a particular location, how much meaning they derive from a place. And we found that this is a very important factor, especially when we think about Otter Rock as a destination for people to go to, but also once they leave, do they have a connection with it? Because the connection is, directly correlated with their intention to protect it, right? So we measured place attachment pre and post either the AR in mobile and the wearable experience. And we found for the mobile, again, this is just for the mobile, significant increase in place attachment. But we didn't find the same thing in the smart glasses, right? So a simple mobile augmented reality experience, few minutes, 4 to 5, significantly increased how much attachment a particular user had to Otter Rock Marine Reserve. Again, there's still a lot of work to be done, but we think this is very promising because it's accessible and we're showing that it can have a consistent positive effect on audiences. And 20% of the people actually were motivated to volunteer in any capacity with Otter Rock, and there was no differences across the groups in terms of who volunteered. Smart glasses weren't more likely than the mobile phone version. All this is to say, mobile AR is incredibly accessible in increasing ocean connectedness. We've done a lot of stuff in outreach. I'm going to skip through because I know we only have like a minute left. We were here at Hatfield in April and want to do more public outreach. We were at National Association of Broadcasters, World Ocean Day, Augmented World Expo, which is a big industry event. And again, we've had over 10,000 people download Otter Rock on mobile phone and visit Otter Rock from the comfort of their home all over the world, right? And this is just organic. We haven't published it. We haven't pushed it. We haven't paid for any advertising. So we're really excited about how this can be kind of scaled and accessed by visitors when they actually go there through QR codes. And this experience was actually nominated and became a finalist for the Augmented World Expo, which is kind of the Oscars for immersive media, for societal impact, right? Best societal impact, alongside big companies like Niantic, who made Pokemon Go. So none of this would be possible without the collaboration of ODFW and Friends of Otter Rock and all the other folks. So final thoughts as I wrap up. When we think about Ocean XR, one of the helpful acronyms, if you leave with anything, remember this acronym, right? When should I use XR? You want to use it when things get dicey. DICE, D-I-C-E. If the thing you're trying to simulate is dangerous, impossible, counterproductive to do in the real world, or expensive, then usually XR is a good solution. It's a justified use, right? The other thing is that accessibility is the most important thing. You can have the most compelling story for a virtual reality headset, there is on the market, but if people aren't able to access it, what does it matter, right? So emphasizing mobile augmented reality is definitely where we're going, and we hope the industry goes broadly. There's obviously a terrestrial bias in XR that we need to make up for, and I hope that everyone in this room can sort of invest in increasing representation of ocean content in digital spaces, because they are needed and it's really important. And also to think of different ways that we can tell different kinds of stories, not just educational, but sci-fi. How many of you have read The Mountain and the Sea? It was written by Ray Naylor, who works for NOAA. Great book. I read it this summer, and it was fascinating to me. And it inspired me to make an experience for the smart glasses called Deep Contact. It pretty much has to do with sentient octopi. So if you're into AI and octopi that are super smart, it might be the book for you. But here's a quick 30-second preview of what that experience looks like. And I'm hoping that we can explore how these kinds of experiences can also build ocean literacy and ocean connectedness, albeit through the mechanism of fiction rather than pure edutainment.
Professor, years ago you presented a theory that our first contact would not happen in space, but in
escape
our
room.
oceans. There are reports of an intelligent species of octopi.
All from the comfort of your home.
Rumors of tool making, culture, even language. Help us find out the truth and establish contact.
So again, very cinematic, and you get to actually use your voice and talk to an octopi, right? So it's very trippy, very weird. But again, when books like this can actually connect people to the ocean, I think there's a lot of potential. Last word, we need more marine social science. There's a really great article on this topic. I had the opportunity to work with a lot of folks in this room, spending 2 weeks in the Pacific, learning about the wonderful science that y'all engage in, the very important work. We want to tell those stories. We want to work together and create our experiences around those. So let's work together. I'll skip that video. And yeah, last quote, the future of social impact games don't rest in academic lab-grown games that persist just long enough for a study and publication. I want to create more. I want to work with you all more and create together. So thank you, and I really look forward to your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Danny. I appreciate that. We're going to jump back and forth between questions online and questions in the room, and I can already see we've got a question online. Go ahead, Roseanne.
Fascinating topic. Thank you. I'm curious to know how these experiences would translate to people with disabilities. For example, people who are deaf who wouldn't get the same experience because they'd miss any audio components, and mainly people who are blind who would miss the visual components, which seem to be the most dependent factor of the connections of these experiences. Is this an area that's being thought about to engage more diverse audiences? And what are some of the challenges with tailoring experiences to different types of audience? Different ages and cultures.
That's a very important question. The first thing that comes to mind is a lot of times when you talk to developers that are making a game, they're making the game for kind of the lowest common denominator, at least the broadest audience. And a lot of times when you mention accessibility, it's like, well, we're not trying to boil the ocean, for lack of a better term. And that's a horrible way to think about it, right? You want to make your experience accessible to as many people as possible. And when you talk about audio, personally, I think audio is the most important component, right? And so an audio first experience that even someone with limited visibility can enjoy is kind of how we approach it. But, having simple things like, subtitles, having language options are things we should be striving for in XR. And that's one of the things that I tried to do with my Sea Turtle project was work with, Spanish speakers to create a Spanish version for the experience. So I worked with voiceover artists in Colombia to make that happen. And so, but it takes a lot of resources, right? Especially when you're just a lab with limited funds, it's hard to create a version for every stakeholder, but it's something to strive for, and I think it's really important. A lot of people are working on this, especially in the game space. There's a lot of, I forget the name of the nonprofit, but they dedicate a lot of resources to how to design accessible games or make your game more accessible. And it can be everything from color schemes and contrast in your games to, ensuring that certain features or that you have multiple features or inputs for your game. So for example, if you're using the smart glasses and it requires you to pinch to grab something, maybe this is very painful for someone, or maybe they don't have a hand free to do that. So how are you creating contingencies to enable different people with different abilities to have the same experiences? So that takes a lot of creative thought, yeah, but it's certainly top of mind. Thank you for asking that.
Nice. Questions in the room? Roseanne, it looks like you might have another question online.
How are the ocean literacy principles established?
How are the ocean literacy principles established?
Yeah.
I'm happy to link out to fundamental papers that explored this topic. The history of ocean, and it has changed. It started with a certain number of ocean literacy principles. That's escaping me right now. But my colleague, Dr. Geraldine Favell, she's a pioneer in this space. So if you just search her, read her papers on ocean literacy principles, and even how they're trying to have additional principles added to really kind of broaden the scope is something. So it's an ever evolving kind of field. But I would just redirect towards some of the existing resources there that paint the true picture of how we got to 7 principles and maybe where we're going in the future. Geraldine Favell.
Great, thank you. All right, oh, hang on just a second. I'm coming to you.
Thanks, Danny. One question for the post-experience AR at Otterrock and how folks, overestimated the area of the reserve afterwards. Do you have some other, past projects or maybe in the literature where something like that happened, where, you put folks in this more spatially aware space, but it somehow leads to less spatial awareness? Um, do you have any more whys or literature, other
Yeah,
personal
we've been
experiences?
noodling on this for quite a bit. What's interesting is that we had another AR project outside of ocean topic. We created an AR experience called, it was for a nonprofit called Hope for Haiti. And the premise of that experience, they build a lot of schools and do a lot of work on the island, right? And so their thing was, can we use AR to transport people through a portal into a schoolhouse that we built, and through that experience, maybe they can connect in a deeper way to the mission and donate money, right? So that was the premise. So we did a study, and one of the outcomes we were looking at is, does experiencing that portal into Haiti reduce the perceived distance to the country, right? Because there's a correlation between how far you think, like a spatial distance between you and a target, can relate causally to, social concern for that community, for example, right? So proximity can be a factor on that. So we measured that. We measured estimated distance between participants and the community that was being depicted in AR. And what we found was, in one study, we found that going through the experience of the portal reduced the estimated distance, right? So they visited Haiti in AR, and the amount of mileage they said was at the beginning was significantly reduced. Great, and that correlated with other pro-social outcomes. We tried to replicate that study again, and we found the opposite. We found that people actually increased the distance, the estimated distance. And we were just like, why is that? What did we do differently? And after noodling around, we realized, oh, in study 1, we had people use their own devices. And in study 2, we had them use lab-owned devices. And then we went down the literature kind of rabbit hole. And there's a whole field of study of just like how lab-owned devices differentially shape perception, right, in these experiences, because you have a deeper connection to your device. It's less of a mediated experience and almost an extension of yourself, which influences how you experience the mediated content. And so with that in mind, I want to explore a bit deeper as to why did people's estimates increase as a function? One explanation is what I mentioned earlier, which is the elicitation of awe might be priming audiences to think larger, right? But we haven't tested that out. One other alternative might be something related to ownership of the devices, right? Since they don't have ownership over the devices, is that doing something to increase perceived distances? I don't know, and I'm kind of hesitant to say definitively, obviously, but I'm really curious to do further research on that. But yeah, thank you for that question.
All right, Roseanne, go ahead.
Oh, I think
Okay, how long do these emotional and behavioral changes actually last after the VR or AR experience?
Yeah, overall, I'd say there's a need to do more longitudinal studies in this space. There's been some studies done, Stanford has done a lot of these longitudinal studies to show, for example, they did a study where they had folks cut down trees in VR and studied how that affected paper usage and paper consumption. And they found, I think, even after a week, those that cut down the virtual tree versus reading about deforestation conserved more paper, right? So there are some studies that show there can be long-term effects on this, but longitudinal work takes a lot of time and a lot of money. But generally, we have seen some evidence of long-term effects, at least when we use 1 week as long-term. And I know Stanford is also working on some stuff with, over the course of an entire semester, how does VR use affect, social connectedness and stuff. And I just did a study with my colleagues at University of Connecticut, where we tested virtual dives and virtual experiences in an undergraduate classroom over the course of 4 weeks, right? And then we measured how all those kind of weekly immersions affected their social connectedness, social dynamics, learning, ocean literacy, things like that. We're still working through the data, but we're finding that there is some longitudinal impact in terms of how it shapes social connection. We haven't dived into sort of the ocean literacy aspect of it yet. but we need more work.
All right, we're going to take one more question in the room. I'm going to sneak in front of these folks.
Thank you for that talk. Very interesting. I was wondering, have you introduced any kind of additional reward system in the process? Some kind of way to make it, I don't know, provide, during the experience, provide some additional reward? I don't know.
Do you have any in mind? I'm curious.
I already had something in my mind a second ago.
Like financial reward or
Well, it could be that.
like gamification, like badges and things like that?
No, it's more like, what should I say? Well, I remember going back many years ago, psychology, you could flash words on somebody and you don't even know it, but they're saying this is a good feeling. These very quick things that you don't even realize you're seeing, and it's telling you you're feeling better. Do you know what I'm talking about?
So I'd probably, I don't remember
Your
that.
subconscious mind, you can send symbols to your subconscious mind while you're viewing something, and that has can have a positive or negative effect on your appreciation of something.
We haven't tested those types of manipulations. A lot of the manipulations we're interested in is what we were talking about earlier around the body, and that's also a subconscious prime. This idea that if you put people in a sea turtle's body, how does that affect their decision making and their feeling versus if they're just disembodied going through the same experience, right? There's been other studies. Oh, is that me? Just making sure I stay on. Did I get out of the box? Cinnamon told me don't get the. So yeah, I would say we haven't tested that kind of stuff, but we are interested in what other factors we can tweak in the storytelling to sort of create some differential outcomes. That can be at the narrative level, right? So kind of going back to the messaging component. We've done studies about ocean acidification where we compare, gain frames versus loss frames. We've done some studies where we looked at the level of interactivity. One specific factor that kind of relates to what you're talking about, a very simple manipulation that can have a big effect, is just showing people an underwater environment, telling them or showing them what's going wrong, like ocean acidification, and then modifying the text that says where the location is. Is it far away from the user or nearby the user, right? So we tested it with participants in Florida. So we either said this is happening off the coast of Florida or off the coast of South Africa, I believe the location was, right? We found 2 coral reefs that looked similar that you couldn't really decipher where it was. And we found interesting results. That simple modification changed their concern for the particular issue at hand. So there's a lot you can do kind of modestly to have a big impact on folks. And yeah, I haven't tried that though. Flashing words, maybe donate money. We'll see. Give ODFW money. I don't know.
All right, I know we're pushing the limit, but Rosanna said we have one last question that needs to be asked from online.
If only James Cameron would fund your lab for the next 20 years.
James, where you at? Come on.
Great to see how the ODFW project fit into your larger research trajectory. Any plans for looking at impacts of this tech on longer-term behavioral outcomes?
Yes, definitely long-term plan. We overestimated how much actual data collection we could do because the development was so ambitious, because we wanted to compare smart glasses, which are the future, right? Meta just released their smart glasses with Ray-Bans. Apple's announcing stuff, Sony and others are kind of going down the wearable path. So these are coming faster than we expect, right? So if this is a new storytelling medium, we really wanted to get ahead of the curve and start asking questions on how do we tell stories on smart glasses, right? And because we chose to build both a mobile app and a smart glasses app, we spent most of our energy on the creation and we didn't have as much time for the testing. So I'm definitely, eager to sort of get back in and just dig in because the content's there, right? You all tried the mobile experience. We have the smart glasses experience. Try it out, come down, I'll show it to you. And yes, we definitely want to, collaborate on more interdisciplinary research to test the effects and quantify what this is actually doing to audiences. Yeah. And yeah, James Cameron, like, cut the check, come on.
Thank you so much. Danny, you are not going anywhere because I know, and I'm selfishly going to plug, you are also working on a project in our visitor center right now.
Yes.
So
When-
hopefully you all will be able to come back and check out a new exhibit eventually. I don't know the timeline of that. But yeah,
December? Yeah.
December soon. All right. Sounds wonderful. All right, everybody, why don't we round of applause for
Thank
them.
you.
Thanks everyone for online. Hope to see you next week.
Woohoo. Hey, how's it going, man? Casey?
Yes.
Pleasure to meet you. I mean,